Rise of Shadows review part 4 with 3 new cards, including a new callback card and a new scheme.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, folks. A lot to talk about here. I think a card that could be really powerful. That said, if you don't have a ton of time, hit the quick reviews link in the description. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into the detailed reviews. Up first here, I have Rafaam's Scheme, the new scheme card for Warlock. A lot of people guessed this idea after seeing the artwork teased, by the way, so go Hearthstone community and Regis Kilbin folks in particular. This one's a 3-mana spell. You summon one 1/1 imp at its base level, but like all schemes, it upgrades each turn, which means eventually this will go up to 7 1/1 imps, which would really be the theoretical max in Hearthstone because boards only fit 7 minions. And clearly, 3-mana summon 7 1/1s is a really powerful play, but it's not something you're going to be able to do on turn 3 when a board of 1/1s would be most impactful, right? You want 1/1s typically earlier in the game or late in the game with some kind of really powerful follow-up, like we've seen with iterations of Token Druid in the past where they would play like Soul of the Forest to make their 1/1s really threatening and sticky and hard to deal with. But nonetheless, as a 3-mana card, on turn 3 or 4, if you can summon 3 or 4 imps, that's still probably a pretty solid play in a lot of scenarios for a deck archetype that likes wide boards of minions, as Warlock and Zoo archetypes in particular have wanted to do in the past. And with things like Grim Rally and some of the buffs that Warlock can achieve, having a bunch of imps around to sacrifice or absorb buffs could end up being a pretty interesting style of play. Now, the real challenge for a card like Rafaam's Scheme, of course, is that it's not always going to be a great turn 3 or turn 4 play. Sometimes you're going to top deck it, and it's going to be a pretty bad play. Summoning 1 imp for 3 mana sucks. Summoning 2 imps for 3 mana is pretty bad, right? It takes a while for this to hit that break point where it feels really good. And, faster aggressive decks that like lots of small minions typically need to play cards from hand. They don't like sitting on stuff for a really long time. So although Warlock can mitigate that a little bit by always drawing more things via their hero power, that also costs mana, which means they're losing tempo and they're losing board aggression and pressure. So I think there's a little bit of a challenge in what kind of deck wants to include this and when it's going to work and how bad of a top deck it's going to be. There's a lot of questions to answer there. I think Warlock needs a follow-up. It needs like that Bloodlust or that Soul of the Forest, something that really turns a wide board into a ton of instant value. Because as it stands right now, Warlock kind of has to like snowball into those boards, not just do them all at once and do something crazy like other classes might be able to do. So for me, Rafaam's Scheme still comes up a little shy. That said, it has that potential where cards down the line could clearly turn this into something cool. So I don't by any means think this is a terrible card, just an okay one with, a hint of potential. So moving on here, let's talk about a couple warrior cards. Up first is the Omega Devastator, a callback card for warrior here that references back to Omega minions, clearly. It's a 4-mana 4/5 mech. The artwork might look a little familiar to you if you remember the Boomsday Project reveal season. This was originally the artwork that was teased for Omega Defender, but people are like, wait a minute, that looks like a mech. So they kind of traded this artwork in for the card you now know as Omega Defender, but they brought this artwork back, which I think is kind of a double callback. It's cool. It's both a callback mechanically, but also a callback via art, and I think that's fantastic. So regarding the card itself, the battle cry reads, if you have 10 mana crystals, that being the Omega mechanic, deal 10 damage to a minion. And I think it goes without saying, that's a ridiculously good battle cry. We've seen things like Crowd Roaster feel good as a 7-mana minion that deals 7 damage. That's a cool play. This is like that times a bajillion because it's 3 mana cheaper. It has a really solid stat line to boot for 4 mana. And it does even more damage, so it's going to kill even more things. So clearly, when you have 10 mana crystals, Omega Devastator is fantastic. And I don't even think that's debatable. It's going to be great. The question is it good enough otherwise to run in a warrior deck? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think it actually will be good enough for a couple reasons. Warrior tends to play a little bit slower. They can play more of a control game plan, and you can often hold cards until they get to 10 mana, and you can pull off crazy swing potential like Omega Devastator. That's going to be fine. Beyond that, if you feel like you really need to get minions on the board on turn 4, there are things like a turn 5 Ziliax. It's a natural follow-up because of the magnetic mechanic that makes playing an Omega Devastator on turn 4 feel pretty okay, because the stat line here obviously is that Chillwind Yeti vanilla stat line, so it's not like it's an inherently terrible play. You're not sacrificing much if you sacrifice the Battle Cry, so if you have some sort of natural follow-up, that's going to be really powerful. And frankly, you could even do this in Ziliax after turn 10 and have an even crazier play sometimes. So for me, I think this is going to slot in just fine into a warrior deck that likes to have a mech package. Clearly off Dr. Boom, if you get this out of an Omega Assembly or a delivery drone, you're going to feel fantastic. This will be a great result. So it's important that this card exists, even if it's not making the cut in a list. But I think it will make the cut. I think this is a solid foundation kind of building on piece that's going to look really, really good for warriors for potentially a while, as long as they have mech packages to work with. So to me, Omega Devastator looks great. And then finally here we have Improve Morale, a new spell for warrior coming in at 1 mana. It reads, deal 1 damage to a minion if it survives, add a lackey to your hand. So we've seen a lot of kind of ping style cards for warrior in the past, and this is adding to that. Things like Inner Rage. It actually reminds me more of Slam, because it's got that conditional aspect. If it survives, much like Slam, you deal 2 damage. If it survives, you draw a card. And Slam has been played quite a bit in Warriors past, maybe not as much lately, but it was that cool execute setup that drew you some resources. Improve Morale, a little different, in some ways better, and in some ways worse. First and foremost, lackeys are often not as good as a card, but they do their own thing. And if you don't want to necessarily draw faster, but you still want to generate resources or some sort of immediate game plan, Improve Morale can do that. So maybe in a deck that's worried about fatigue, it could offer a way to generate a cool resource. The challenge, of course, is that it's not a huge value card. You're going to be combining it with some other game plan or some other thing to do, like Execute, for instance. It's a great Execute setup. You can ping your own minions like an Acolyte of Pain to draw a card, or hit your own Grom Hellscream to do a ton of damage. Warrior obviously has ways to utilize a 1 damage ping. I think the question just remains, is it going to do enough? Is there enough value there? Does it contribute to some distinct game plan that there aren't other cards that just do it better? Would you rather run a Slam? Would you rather run an Inner Rage? Like, what's it going to be? Is Improved Morale going to be the one that rises to the top and makes the cut? Maybe if there's some lackey synergy cards, that's a way for this to come to life. Maybe if you just like playing a lot of low-cost things, that could be a way for this to come to life. Like, what if there's like a Miracle Warrior with Gadgets and Auctioneer? I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? So the card does enough good things, and it's, efficient enough, it's cheap enough, it synergizes with the class well enough that I do think there's a chance. I'm not seeing an obvious immediate path that this card's going to take to the top of the meta. I don't think it's going to be fundamentally important, because there are alternatives that look similar and do the same kinds of things. So a fine card, thematically kind of crazy given all the stuff going on at Blizzard lately. I mean, this feels a little tongue-in-cheek to me. But nonetheless, a card we might see occasionally, but probably will never be a dominant piece of the Hearthstone meta. And that wraps it up for my detailed reviews. So now let's take a look at some quick reviews. Rafaam's Scheme is a 3-star card. Omega Devastator is a 4-star card. Improve Morale is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. This review is done. It's good to be back in the saddle. The life of a model was fun for a little while. Glad we had some shenanigans there in reviews number 2 and particularly in number 3. I hope you had some fun. I certainly have. But all that said, share your thoughts on these cards. I want to hear your takes, your insights. Leave those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.